In summary, server-side tracking gives you highest trust in your data, as Jordan just mentioned, highest data quality, and best data security. However, you're potentially going to be missing out on client-side only interactions and typical client-side information, such as the URL or additional page metadata, and it can take longer or more effort and more teams to implement.
So if you are interested in implementing it, I've got some integration tips for you that I hope you find helpful. The first one is to try and share IDs across the client-side environment to the server-side environment. So what's probably going to happen is you're probably going to want to analyze those server-side events alongside your client-side events, and you're going to want to know that those events were triggered by the same user. Now, if you use a tool like GA4 or a tool like Snowplow that set IDs in the client, you're going to want to have to pass those IDs over to the server. This is generally quite straightforward if the IDs are in cookies or in request headers or in JWTs, or even in the body of the request actually itself. If you're doing this, I would strongly recommend using post requests instead of get requests with query parameters, because if you're using get requests with query strings, then you can run into the issue that Elle mentioned, where you might accidentally surface sensitive data into the URL. On a similar vein, you're going to want to implement session stitching. And what we mean by this is, again, these server-side and client-side events, you're probably going to want to treat into the same session when you come to do your analysis, if you're doing session-ized metrics like conversion rates. Yeah, again, if you're using a tool like GA4 or Snowplow that do client-side sessionization rather than a tool like Universal Analytics that did server-side sessionization, then you're going to want to include and do whatever you can to get that session ID over to the server when those server-side events fire. Now, depending on how you have it implemented, you don't even have to send it as a tracking event, like a GA4 event or a Snowplow event, to the server. Any request from a form or a page load or any element that actually hits the server, as long as it's first party, you'll get the cookies, and the cookies can be received by the server side. The request object will be available to the server side environment for it to parse, pull out those values, and then add to any other events. And the reason that's really important is because you need to be really, really careful with timestamps. Timestamps are extremely complicated because they can't always be trusted. Servers' timestamping technology are generally much more authoritative and trustworthy because they can sync to an authoritative time server quite frequently to ensure that they are not drifting out of reality and that they are still tight to the real time that the event happened. Client devices can and do this, but they do it much less frequently. This is mainly because they want to save the battery on your phone. They don't want to have to be pinging a time server every second to make sure they're still in time. And what this means is your client-side timestamps will drift from reality, sometimes by milliseconds, seconds, minutes, sometimes hours and days. If you've ever looked at some real raw, if anyone's used Snowplow data and stuff like that, you can see these discrepancies in timestamps from reality. The best way to handle this is to track multiple timestamps, client-side timestamps and server-side timestamps on those events. So the time that the client sent the event and the time your server received the event, and use differences in those times to rationalize when the event actually happened.